Hi, it's Adrian. Thanks for joining in. In this video, we're going to look into interactions between the player and entities. So entities in Mythril2D are things like characters and chests, but anything can be made into an entity. So the interactions between player and entities are a little bit more advanced than commands because they provide you with additional features. So we're going to look into that and see how they differ from commands and conditions. Let's get started. So in the previous tutorial, we looked into interactions between a character and a command trigger. But in this video, we're going to look at interactions between a character and an entity. So entities offer more features than regular command triggers. So let's get started by adding a chest to our scene. So for that, we go to the tile palette, game objects, we select the game object brush, we click on the chest and we make sure that we are using the default layer. And let's add a chest right here. Now let's hit play. You can see that if I approach the chest, I also have an icon that tells me that I can interact with this chest. The same one as the one you see over command triggers. So if I click on the chest, I can see that this chest is empty because I didn't put anything inside. So now if I look at the chest inside of the hierarchy, I can see in the inspector that the chest is right here, and I can see that it has some persistable settings. So this is because any entity in Mythril2D also inherit from persistable. This means that you can persist a lot of information about the chest, such as its state, whether it's opened or closed, inside of a save file. This is done by checking this button, Auto Persist when pre-instanced. By default, this is checked for all the chests, so you don't need to change this setting. Of course, you can also execute a command on death. As we've seen previously, there are commands a little bit everywhere in Mythril2D. And if you go down, you're going to find an interaction setting here. So you can see that the interaction is set to sequential interaction, meaning that you can play as many interactions as you want. But there are also other types of interactions. You can use a single interaction like chest interaction if you want, or you can use a sequential one if you want to execute multiple ones. So in this case, the chest has two interactions. One, chest interaction that is going to try to open the chest. So it has a link to itself. And a second one, dialogue interaction, which is going to play a dialogue if the previous interaction fails. So the main difference between interactions and commands is that interaction can technically fail. So for instance, the chest interaction will fail if the chest cannot be opened, meaning that the next interaction in the list is going to be played instead. You can also see that there is an interruption policy setting that lets you choose what happens if an interaction fails. For instance, I can play all the interactions until one fails, or I could play all of them until one succeeds. By default, it's set to unsuccess, meaning that we're going to try to execute each interaction sequentially until one of them succeeds. Inside of an interaction list, you can also add any sort of command you want by selecting the command interaction. This system allows you to chain interactions with commands. Of course, you also have conditional interaction if you want to branch out inside of your interaction list. And you'll find many other sort of interactions like in, quest, shop, craft, and even dialogue interaction. Another advantage of interactions over commands is that interaction always have a reference to the source and the target of the interaction. So both of these source and target have to be entities. This allows for things like playing a dialogue and automatically filling out the speaker in the dialogue sequence. So for instance, if I add an NPC to the scene, like this one, and I hit play, you can see that the NPC is interactable and that the speaker, so this little box over here, is already filled out for you. This is because the dialogue interaction is aware of the source and the target. Now let's look into the interaction list for this entity. So let's select Yosbar and look in its inspector. So you can see that the NPC has a bunch of settings, including interaction. can see that we're using a sequential interaction because there are multiple different interactions that this NPC can support. And the first one is quest interaction. That is what you want to use for pretty much all your NPCs. This is necessary for any NPC to be able to manage quests such as offering a quest, progressing a quest, or completing a quest. You can see that the second interaction is a conditional interaction. So what it does is, if a quest task is active, then we're going to play a specific dialogue line. So the order of this interaction is very important. The first one is always going to try to execute. So if there is a quest that can be offered, completed, or progressed, it's going to be done first. Second, we're going to check this condition. And if this condition fails, then we're going to execute the next element in the list. So shop interaction, which means that the shop interaction with this character is the default fallback interaction. Since projectiles are also entities, they are technically interactable. So if I look into the prefab folder of the demo game, and I go into entities and projectiles, and I put an arrow on the map, if I hit play, you can see that the arrow is not doing anything, it's not moving because it hasn't been thrown with a projectile ability. And it also cannot be interacted with. You can see that there is no little icon over it. Now if I select this arrow and I look in the inspector, I'll find at the top that it's on the layer projectile, which means that it cannot be interacted with. If I put it on the interaction layer, and I hit play again, now you can see that the arrow is interactable. Of course, there are no interaction associated with it, so nothing is happening. Let's try to add one. Let's go under interaction and select a command interaction. We're simply gonna play a dialogue line here. And let's hit play. Here we go. So it's very easy to make entities in Mythril2D. You just have to implement the class called entity, and you can create any sort of entity in your game. You can also create custom interaction for this type of entity and use them directly from the inspector. Signs, even though they are very similar to entities in some way, they are not exactly an entity. As we've seen in the previous tutorial, they use a command trigger instead. So both approaches are valid depending on the context. If you need to be able to have a reference to the source and the target inside of your interaction, then you need to use an interaction. If you don't care about the source and target, then a command trigger would be more appropriate. In both cases, entities and command triggers should be on the interaction layer. And of course, they should have some sort of collider, unless their activation even doesn't require a collider, like on start. And that is it for interactions. I hope this was useful. Now you should be able to create your own NPCs and your own chests with custom interactions. Thanks for joining in, and I'll see you for the next tutorial. Cheers!